Okay, hold on. I have to welcome my friend Nechemia Gordon. Welcome, Mr. Gordon.
Nehemia,
Hey
well,
Asher, how's it
I
going?
feel honored and
Uh,
special.
I've never done a live before, so I'm not really sure how it works. I actually want to hear from you. Is it Usher or Asher? How you pronounce it?
it depends if you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi, but I'm Ashkenazi, so say
Okay,
Asher. It's fine.
Asher, okay. So, well, I'm Ashkenazi, but I'm also Israeli. Um,
Okay,
so
touche.
anyway, I've been watching some of the videos you're doing, and I'm kind of blown away and I want to hear from you the attitude that a lot of the folks are
I made
having.
a video for you
Oh,
20
did you?
years ago.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
there was a video.
with Newman, I do remember.
Yeah. It was a long time ago. It
I
was
remember that.
who's that singer? Blessed is the man, like
Andrew
Psalm chapter
Hodkinson.
1.
I think it's
Yeah,
Andrew
that's it.
Hodkinson. I remember that.
Yeah.
So explain to me, because I grew up
hmm
Orthodox, but it's been so
Sure.
long that I guess I don't understand the mentality. Look, I don't proselytize people. It's not my thing. But that
hmm
they would be upset with you, accuse you of doing it. What do they call it? Minhag goyim. He said a Gentile custom.
But who
So
said that?
it was a live you did like yesterday or the day before. Uh,
Oh, you saw that? The Jewish chores.
is that what he's called? I don't know.
Why do I proselytize, or why do
Why did they have
Jews?
such a proselytize? That's what I'm trying to
Well,
understand.
because of Kabbalah mainly. Because of
Uh,
Kabbalah in the Talmud, there's many sources. I
so
mean,
so
Salo Baron, Paul
you have
Johnson, Josephus. Huh?
you have to have a
Good.
Jewish soul. Is that their idea?
Unfortunately, yeah. Like the
Okay.
first parak of the Tanya, the whole notion of like Helek Elokam Yimal Mamish, that every Jew is a physical piece of God, but every Gentile comes from the Sitra Achor, from the unclean klipot. They also teach that if you do convert, it's because you were Jewish all along. You have this Pinta Yid, Jewish
Right.
spark, Jewish
It's
neshama.
like the Christians have the idea of once saved, always saved, and then they stopped
Right.
in believing in Jesus, and they say, "Oh, you were never saved in the first place."
Correct. It's a primitive idea both ways. I believe that our sages, those we call Chazal,
Uh-huh.
did believe in proselytizing. There's actually more sources by Chazal to encourage Gentiles to come to Judaism than there is to justify this modern day Kiruv movement. The Kiruv
Hmm.
movement was essentially invented by Chabad 100 years ago. Now, I think it's a good idea, but I don't think it's a chovah to go around thinking that God expects you to care about people just because of pedigree. He wants you to separate the world between the ethical and the unethical. And I think that it's a great idea to encourage a Gentile to love God to such an extent that they would want to convert. I don't know if someone wants to call that proselytizing. It just sounds like essentially a good idea. And because, I mean, I think that every secular Jew has the din of kegoy, that means, I mean, do it to them also. Yes, it's a good idea to bring people who are afar close. I mean, it's not like a big Hiddush. And this is why we're here. I mean, the Rambam says that, like, the third mitzvah in Sefer Mitzvot is the mitzvah of loving Hashem. And he says, how do you do that? By doing what Avram Avinu did in Haran. And the like, Midrashim teach that he converted the men and Sarah converted the women. They proselytized. It made sense to them. But suddenly, post Kabbalah, we only care about people with Jewish blood. Sounds primitive and bigoted.
You're saying Chabad made up the Sheva Mitzvot B'Nenoch?
No. The Rebbe created the campaign. Yes, the Rambam teaches in the Hilchos Malachim that during Yom HaMashiach, we coerce the nations to accept this on threat of
Oh,
death,
I
but
lost the
it's not
connection.
anything that they should aspire to. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Uh,
I think well, you lost me. I'm not sure.
can you hear me?
We should aspire to.
Yeah, sorry. So the Rambam writes in the end of Hilchos Malachim that we're supposed to coerce the nations to keep the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach on threat of death during Yom HaMashiach. But it's not anything that they're aspired to keep. If they break any of the Sheva Mitzvahs, they're Chayav Misa with one witness, with no pre-warning. This is clearly not something that you should aspire to do. I mean, you should aspire to be a Yid, right? You can't be Jewish. You're already a Ben or Bat Noach. There's nothing to accept. Now, there is a notion of the Chasidei Umat Olam. That's another thing that it's more theoretical in nature. I mean, Chazal were split in the idea that if you kept the Sheva Mitzvahs because you believe that God wanted you to keep them, that you get a Chelik on Olam Haba. Like Beit Shammai disagreed, Hillel agreed. However, when they're offering this to Gentiles as an alternative to Christianity, they never tell them that the rabbis are split on the notion. However, what the rabbis are not split is on if a Jew has the chelik and olam haba and pleases God fully by converting to Judaism, and he does. So I'm for like a truth campaign, and that's telling people the truth. If they told every Gentile that it's not 100% that if you keep the Shabbat Mitzvot B'nai Noach, you have a chelik and olam haba, no one would choose to become a Noahide. It's because they lied to them. That's it. If we can't agree in the Jewish world on whether to eat a French fry because of the hashgacha, you're going to offer a Gentile a wacky system like the Noahide laws that it's theoretical. There's never been a nation ever in Jewish history that lived by 7 Noahide laws. The reason this exists nowadays is because we made conversion so impossible that the rabbis ask, what do we do with people who are waiting 2, 3, 4, 5 years to convert? Well, call them Noahides, and we'll get the flunkiest rabbis in the Jewish world to write books for them, like the Divine Code and the Path of the Righteous Gentile, so they can pad their pockets financially and basically throw them a bone because now we're in charge. They're coming to us, so now it's our turn to mistreat them for all the years they mistreated us. It's completely, I mean, it's a decrepit system.
So I had a friend who's I won't say who he is, but he's an Orthodox rabbi, and he was involved, or he wanted to get involved in teaching non-Jews, and he was told by one of the leading rabbis, and one of the leading rabbis might just be it was his rabbi, right? I don't really know, but he was told by a rabbi. They said we don't have enough time and resources for the Jews. Why are we? It's not right to divert those resources towards non-Jews. Now, and they said, look, if you want to do it, but we're not going to basically give you any money to do it. But in your case, not only saying we're not going to give money to do it, I hear people telling you this is horrible. What are you doing? It's not Jewish what you're doing. That's very strange. I mean,
right, I'm just one person. I mean, I'm not telling people that they have an obligation to do this. I just think
Question
it's a
for
good idea.
Nehemia. And I know the whole Messianic community knows who you are because of Michael Rood, right? So is there any backlash on that?
I didn't hear. Is there a what?
Is there any backlash from your involvement with the Messianic communities or with Michael Rood?
Is there backlash from whom? Backlash.
From the
Definitely.
Jewish
There's
rabbis, from like
yeah. Oh, definitely. I have people who say that Nechemia is really secretly a Christian, and then I have the Christians who say Nechemia is really secretly an anti-missionary. And as the Yiddish joke says, "Nicht dahin, nicht daher," neither this nor that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I've heard that. I was just curious because you're pretty open, and Asher actually kind of reminded me of you, but
my position is I'm willing to teach whoever wants to hear what I have to say, and
right.
I go and I speak at all kinds of different places. I speak at different places, and I've spoken at different shuls, and I've spoken at churches. I've spoken at I don't think I've been invited to a mosque yet, but I'm open to go if they'll invite me.
It's hard to have Mr. Gordon on my show without me challenging his Karaite Judaism at least a little bit. I mean, are you
Please
okay
go
with
ahead.
that?
I welcome.
Okay, great. Okay. I appreciate you, and I know you're willing to dialogue with people, and this is why. Yeah. I mean, I think I could.
Look, I'm not interested in having a debate because there's a lot of painful Jewish history and like the disputations, and for both, I think both Karaites and Rabbinites, that's the case. But I'm very happy to have a dialogue and a conversation.
Great. That's mostly what I do. I do interviews and dialogues. I don't know if you've heard my rendition of the oral law, or how many rationalists teach
I'm
the
really
oral law.
intrigued. I don't know what box to put you in. I don't know enough about
Right.
you.
Well, once, I think around 8 years ago, we chatted on Facebook once, and then you mentioned something that you started off in somewhat of the rationalist camp, and then you moved on from it. I don't know if you remember saying anything like that.
I don't remember what the context was, but what I might have been referring to is there's definitely this idea that like Rambam had, that God is this almost like this abstract entity who doesn't actually feel love. Just the term love is just something that for us to understand. He doesn't really feel anger. That's just something for us to understand. And I definitely had that approach. That's as I would say the rationalist approach. And now I tend to, if the Tanakh says that God loves and God is angry, I believe it.
That's exactly what I feel, by the way. I've come to that disposition in my life that in terms of the Rambam, I can accept his arguments about God not being limited in any way. However, I think it's inappropriate for him to make the declaration that if someone happens to think that God has human emotions, or that God changes his mind, or in any way tries to put God in any sort of box, that he loses a share in what to come, and that God is displeased by him. Rabbeinu Bachya ibn Pekuda in the Duties of the Heart says that God wouldn't condemn someone for taking a statement in the Bible literally. So, I mean, if it says that God has a hand, if it says Hashem ish milchama, someone wants to believe it, then believe it. I mean, that's what it says. It says God changes his mind. God, it says the Yad HaZaka, he brought the Jews out with a strong hand. Maybe he has a hand. I'm not saying that I believe this, but I think there's an allowance in the Bible to believe it because that's what the Bible says. So the problem I have is when people say that we can't understand God. He's so complex that our simple minds can't wrap our heads around the idea of God. But at the same time, they're going to build this theological wall of beliefs that you have to try to stay within in order to be accepted in a synagogue. So these guys have become theological gatekeepers, and so I think we're kindred spirits in that
wonder
area.
if we have to make a distinction. Do we have to make a distinction between? I'm asking. I don't know. Between. Sure. So you would agree that, or you would, I think, have the position that there are things that if you take in the Tanakh and implement in practice, literally that you've committed a sin, whereas you're saying in
not at all.
Belief and thought. Well, like for example, don't boil a kid in his mother's milk. You wouldn't say if you limit yourself to only not eating a kid in its mother's milk, but you eat like I do, beef and cheese. You wouldn't say that's a sin.
Not a sin. You'd be breaking a halakha.
Okay, breaking a halakha. Okay, what's the difference?
I mean, well, one is rabbinic and one's from the Torah. In terms of safek the Rabban lehakel and safek the right to lechumra.
So all right. So I have to wrap my head around this semantics.
So in terms of basar v'chalav, I think it's fully rabbinic. Although there's three instances and they embellish on it. Even how it's practiced today, the only way you'd be violating a Torah prohibition is if the cheese you ate your hamburger with was in some way related to that hamburger. From that perspective, every rabbi would agree it's essentially rabbinic. I would go further and say that the whole notion is an embellishment of the initial statement that, as the Rambam writes in Mor Nevuchim, that it was a practice back then, that the actual avoda was that people used to worship idols by boiling a kid in his mother's milk. It wasn't that God had an issue. I mean, he didn't like cheeseburgers, right? I mean, we see Avram Avinu having a similar mixture. In terms of consensus amongst the Jewish people, I believe the judges were given that authority to establish such laws, even though they may have been wrong. It says in Masechet Horayot that the court itself made mistakes, and there's a certain korban that they would have to bring when they made mistakes. However, for the sake of consensus, for the sake of unity, there had to be some order amongst Israel. I don't believe that Torah Sheba'al Peh was given in Har Sinai. And it's interesting because the Rambam writes in Sefer Mitzvot.
Okay. And just to clarify, you're Orthodox, but you don't believe Sheba'al Peh was given on Mount Sinai.
Well, I'll tell you what the Rambam says. I mean, the Rambam is also Orthodox, I guess, if that even existed back then. So the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvot writes, what makor do we have to believe in Torah Sheba'al Peh in the Torah? So he says, Parshat Shoftim, the mitzvah of lo tasur, of not straying from the right to the left, of what in this case, the Shoftim, the Beit Din Hagadol rules into existence from the place that God would choose. And then God said that by disobeying them, you'd be disobeying me. That could be understood in many different ways, but it does give the authority to judges to establish consensus, to establish some sort of civil law. However, they can't call it Torah. They have to call it rabbinic. Now, this was initially the question I was going to ask, because this is my rendition of the oral law. The average academic in the yeshiva system will tell you that the source of Torah Sheba'al Peh is Parshat Shoftim. It's not Har Sinai. It's Parshat Shoftim. I mean, this is exactly what the Rambam writes. In the first parak of Hilchos Mamrim, he says, Beis Din Hagadol Sheb'Yerushalayim Chem Iker Torah Sheba'al Peh. That is the Beit Din Hagadol in the Lishkat Hagazit in Yerushalayim. That's the Iker of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Now, I know there's many midrashim that teach something else, but the early rationalists didn't believe that. Mainly because it only takes a primitive person to think that the only reason you'd be forced to keep something is if it was given Har Sinai. No, it's a little more sophisticated than that. In the first chapter of Deuteronomy, in Numbers, when it tells Moses to establish a court of 70 elders, 71 with themselves, the idea of consensus always existed amongst Israel. However, we shouldn't fall into the trap of becoming a Baal Tosif and adding to the Torah, calling rabbinic laws Torah laws. So this is why, if you break a halakha, you're not technically sinning. That we have this principle of safek the Rabban lehakel and safek the right to lechumra. That if you have an actual safek on something that's rabbinic, we're commanded to be lenient. However, like if you have a safek, a question on something from the Torah, we're commanded to be strict. These are rules that most mystics do not implement. I mean, for them, everything was given in Har Sinai. They dumbify the whole system. And this is why. I mean, I think post Shabtai Tzvi, Judaism took a theological nosedive and hasn't really recovered.
So some of what you say makes you sound like a Karaite. I wonder if you've been accused of that.
Yeah, well, I've always wanted to share it with you because I've interviewed many Karaites, and they can tolerate such a rendition of the oral law, right? I mean, even Karaites have this notion of the Sevel HaYerusha, the yoke of the inheritance is essentially a guide.
I'm one of the Karaites who doesn't accept Sevel HaYerusha, so. But you're right. Most Karaites believe in this, or traditional Karaites believe in the Sevel HaYerusha. You're right.
Yeah, which is essentially a book of tradition that, I mean, you need consensus. There's many Karaites in Israel that won't eat shawarma, let's say, right? Because of the fat that's put on top of it.
No, that's definitely not kosher.
There's checks and balances. There's gray area that has to be filled in order for this religion to be kept in a uniform manner. And that's what I teach the oral law is. That encourages me to embrace at least the Mishnah, here, which is the rulings of people who had smicha, or that we have faith that had smicha, because it's all an act of faith, I mean, at the end of the day. So that's what makes me Orthodox, because I believe in Torah Shebiktav and Torah Shebal Peh, but from a rational perspective.
I once asked someone if he was Orthodox, and he said, I wouldn't call myself Orthodox because the type of person who would call themselves Orthodox would be offended if you wouldn't call them Orthodox. Now, he really was Orthodox. Also. He went to an Orthodox shul and followed Orthodox halacha, but he didn't like the label. So I want to and I don't have sources in front of me. I'm looking at my phone, right? But I recall there being sources that don't agree with your characterization of the oral law, and I'll just off the top of my head mention 3 without being able to produce them. That'll have to have my computer and my Bar-Ilan shoot in front of me to look up all the sources. So first of all, there's something in the Midrash or the Gemara that says that everything was given on Har Sinai, and it makes this statement which would probably suggest it's pretty late, but it says something like, Mishnah, Agada, I forget exactly. I don't think it says Talmud. I think it says Gemara. Even they were given in Mount Har Sinai. So that's probably a maximalist view. And then you have a machloket, if I remember correctly, between Rambam and I want to say it's maybe it's Avad, who wrote Sefer Kabbalah. It's been a long time since I've looked at this. And the machloket is what exactly was given, because they both agree, okay, it couldn't be everything because there's all these disagreements. And so Rambam says that, and it's been a while, again, I could be getting this backwards or completely wrong. Mm-hmm. But I believe Rambam says something like, well, originally there was no machlokot, there were no disputes, but the people were the students didn't excel enough in logic, and so they, because of their lack of logic, they didn't derive some of the principles correctly, something to that effect. Mm-hmm. And then, and I forget.
Let me try to fill in those gaps a little bit.
Sure.
Because the Rambam never spoke to the Ravid. I mean, the Ravid commented negatively almost everything on the Rambam. I mean, that the Rambam wrote. The Rambam writes in his
Machloket doesn't mean they necessarily ever.
No, right. I understand. I mean, for those listening, because the way I'm going to explain this, I'm not going to connect them exactly together. In his Hadama to Persian Mishnayot, he brings down an idea called Halach LaMoshe Misinai. And then he says, in this theoretical idea, that for something to be considered halach l'moshe misinai, and he limits it to 30 things only, but these are things that can have any machloket in it. But then there's other rabbis who came in later and said that even in his 30 things, within those 30 things, there were disagreements by Chazal in them, and, so it's less than 30. So the notion, as you know, the story of halach l'moshe misinai, that, and I think Rabbi Akiva is teaching a class, and then Moshe Rabbeinu is in the, so it shows that it was theoretical to begin with. I mean, it was really like a joke. So
I don't think that's Rambam. Are you sure that's Rambam? I thought Rambam's understanding of halach l'moshe misinai is something that has no basis in the written Torah, and so it's only from, and that's not what I'm talking about. In other words, like the example that Ravad brings, if I remember correctly, is, it says ve'evatai kohen kriyas shema ba'aravit, but from when do you can you read the Shema in the evening? But the question of, do you actually read the Shema in the evening? That's from the oral law. That was revealed to Moshe on Har Sinai. And then the details of when you do it, that's something that they debated about, because either they weren't good enough students who employed logic, or I forget what the other reason is. So let's take that for example, that you read the Shema in the evening. I guess you could derive it from the Torah, but it's not necessarily clear from the Torah that's meant to be taken literally.
Yeah.
So would that be oral law?
Well, that's agadah. Anything by Chazal that's not prescriptive in nature falls on the level of agadata. Someone is debating if something's essentially from the Torah or from the rabbis, and it's not really prescriptive in nature. Now, it would be in the sense that because when something is considered from the Torah, but not in terms of an asmachta, I mean, like really from the Torah, then in terms of suffix deraita lechumra, well, then it would apply. But we always separate on whether if it's from the Torah or not, because if it's from the rabbis, then people could be makel on it. Only because there's a discussion by Chazal, if it doesn't have to do with halacha le'maseh, then it's essentially considered disposable. And I would say probably 90% of the Talmud and the Mishnah fall into that category, and all of Perkahot falls into that category.
So reciting the Shema in the evening isn't halacha l'maaseh? Maaseh than reciting the Shema in the evening. I mean,
we have a mitzvah when you arise and when you go to bed. You're saying that the argument by Rabbi Akiva was that it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai?
No. That's a separate story. I'm talking about the issue of So what I was saying, maybe you can hear some of it. I know we don't have a great connection. Is that I forget again if it was Ravad or the Rambam, that they were saying that one of those rabbis, or maybe both of them, were saying that so there's a machloket for when do you recite the Shema in the evening, but there's no machloket that you recite the Shema in the evening. So reciting the Shema in the evening, that is pure oral law, and then the details that there's machlokot about, there's debates about, those weren't revealed to Moshe and Har Sinai.
I don't know how that would apply, because reciting Shema in the evening has nothing to do with the oral law. That's a clear law. I mean, it's in the Torah.
It's not obvious from the Torah that that's meant to be taken literally, right? That. In other words,
but the rabbis would take that literally.
Clearly, I understand. And the reason to take it literally is because the oral law tells you to.
Oh no, that's fine. That's fine. But that would be classified for sure as from the Torah. I mean, there's things that were developed from the rabbis that have Torah weight in it. Here, for example, the 39 categories of prohibited labor, with the whole malacha system with todos and avos. Also, the sanctifying of the,
do you agree
the new moon.
Lamed Het Nachot, do you agree are oral law?
They're fully rabbinic. However, because it's tied to an actual mitzvah, it has a Torah weight. Because God tells us to keep Shabbat, but He doesn't tell us how to do it. So when Chazal stepped in, and I believe that, I mean, Chazal existed in the time of Moses. I'm not saying that Rabbi Akiva existed, but Shoftim did exist, and this I believe in faith. But in terms of smicha, the process did exist. So then, if they taught us how to sanctify the moon, nowhere in the Torah did it say that we go by the moon, but it said that we had to have some system in place. That system would be considered Torah. Even though I could be sophisticated enough to acknowledge that, yes, it was created by essentially the Shoftim, but because it's tied to a Torah command that we wouldn't be able to keep as a nation without it, in terms, like if there was a safek, you'd have to go lechumra on it.
So there's an example where as a Karaite, we have a principle called koach hadibur, which basically means the force of the linguistic force of the words. That would be like probably the way to translate into English.
No, fine, but you would still need a consensus on.
No. So the point is from koach hadibur, from the meaning of the word chodesh, that itself tells you that it's a crescent new moon. And so now, how do we know that? The same way that you know that yamin is right and small is left. And so the assumption we have is, and I guess it could be wrong, but we don't think it's wrong, is that the ancient Israelites, when they heard the Torah read on every seventh year, it was written in such a way that they could actually understand it. And so it was written in Hebrew, and it was written in a language that the average person, and even it says even the children who did not know, they would hear and they would learn. So maybe they need to hear it 2 or 3 times, right? I don't know how, right? Because it's only every 7 years. But by the time of 20, they're responsible to follow the Torah. They're, they know good from evil is the phrase that appears in the
No,
Torah.
these ideas are mutually exclusive. You could be absolutely right in terms
Mm-hmm.
of Kol HaDibor, but there still had to be a consensus to declare it so, because amongst Jewish people, you're always going to have different opinions. There had to be
So I don't think,
shoftim saying,
yeah. So I don't think so. So I don't think it was a okay. So I hear what you're saying about a consensus. I look at it a bit differently. I mean, there was a system of judges that would set up, and at the top of the judge system there was a prophet, and that's probably where the Karaite approach would really divert from the rabbinical approach, because the Rambam has this great statement that if I forget exactly how he says it, but something to the effect of, if there's a 1,001 rabbis and 1,000 prophets who say something, you follow the 1,001 rabbis. And as a Karaite, I would say, no, I only need one prophet to say it, if he's truly
yeah,
a
but from a
prophet.
Torah
Maybe
perspective, well,
maybe I don't
I
know
mean,
if
a
he's a
prophet can't
prophet.
bring anything new. That's the thing.
No, he
Like in
can't.
Parshat Shoftim,
No,
I
he
mean, it
can't bring
says,
anything new. I agree with you.
yeah.
But he could teach you what actually the Torah means. So in the book of Nechemia, when they open up, and this is a great example, Nechemia chapter 8, my book, right? When they open up and they read about how to make a sukkah, and it says kakatuv, as it is written, and you say, wait, where is that written? Well, and it's clearly written in Leviticus 23:40, which the rabbis interpret as as the Arba Minim, as the the lulav and the etrog and the it's Hatasim and Aravot. But it's clear that in Nechemia 8 they understood that as building materials for the sukkah.
But that's essentially because Nehemiah and Ezra, that were part of the Anshe Knesset Gedolah. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, so they themselves, in many cases, now this also, I mean, I have no problem using the word faith, but the Rambam brings on in his Akdamat Mishnah Torah that Nevi'im in general also sat on the Beit Din Hagadol, that they also had smicha. So these ideas are mutually exclusive. Now the problem I would have more with it is that in Parshat Shoftim, when it says in all areas of dispute, it talks about the Cohen, the Levi,
Mm-hmm.
and the Shofet. It never says a Navi. So it seems that the Navi, but like you're saying, it's there to clarify, but it's not there to in some way give over consensus or fill in gray area.
This idea of consensus, I don't think that would have been relevant. If you look at the consensus of most of the period of ancient Israel, they were idolaters who worshipped literal idols and statues, and they clearly had traditions that they would have said went back to Moshe on Har Sinai. Like, this is the whole thing with in the hanging nun in Shoftim in the book of Judges.
But these are the same people that you just said have insight to understand what a word could mean in the collective. If they can't agree on macro issues in one area, how can they agree on micro issues in another area?
They knew what the words meant. It wasn't so back then. It wasn't a question of what the words meant. There was a question of, okay, what do we have to actually do? What can we do? What should we do? And if we've got this perfectly good high place where we can bring sacrifices, why would we go all the way to Shiloh? And besides, my great-great-grandfather was Moshe, so you think you know better than something written in a book. He was my ancestor, right? That's the whole story of the hanging nun in Shoftim. Or not the whole story, but that's a major part of with the tribe of Dan, and it's in Judges 17 to 18. So
I think
you
we
had
agree
these
on this,
people
by the way, that we need insight. You're saying that they had the insight back then, colloquially. I believe that the Jewish people, as they appear today, need some sort of order to move forward. So regardless, there was some insight that we're missing today. I believe that we're missing the core today. And I think you're saying that we're missing the common sense that the early Hebrews had back then to really understand what the Bible was literally saying.
Oh, so that's absolutely what I'm saying. We have to do a lot more work for something that came naturally. So you might have someone who, well, you not just might, you have many people who won't know the basic words of Hebrew. And how do we know what Hebrew means? And this is interesting. We could bring some examples where halakha says to do one thing, but when we look linguistically, we find out actually the meaning of the Hebrew word is something completely different.
Right, and I
So
admit that. No, because the Talmud itself has a whole tractate that deals with the errors of the court. So I mean, I think the Jewish people back then, now that we deify those rabbis, but back then understood that look at these wacky guys trying to lead us. But regardless, they believed that God still told us to follow them for the sake of order, because you can't run a nation by everyone just walking around with the Tanakh, like trying to decide what was good for them. right? I mean, you had a nation of stiff-necked people. Just by the simple fact that they were stiff-necked, I mean, it's hard for me to believe that there was some insight among them to decide what one word meant, right? I mean, there had to be a court.
You know, I think I'm a libertarian at heart, and I would have probably been a rebellious elder back then, because I would not follow the majority just because the majority said, yeah.
No, that's cool.
You know,
That's cool.
look,
I mean, I kind of knew
story
what you believed, and I feel that we're kindred spirits on a lot of things, you know. And I've discussed with enough Karaites that there's a reason why people accuse me of being a Karaite, but I think, I mean, regardless, I know that what upsets many Karaites, because it upsets me, that when people call things Torah when it's not Torah, right? That when they say Torah teaches and they utter out some medrash or they start quoting from the Zohar, that really frustrates me, and I'm sure it frustrates every Karaite, right? But I think there's somewhere in the middle where we can meet, where we can get along.
They say of things that are Torah that they're not Torah, because it proves our point. Meaning when Orthodox, refer to every midrash as Torah, we're like, okay, we've been vindicated.
I completely agree with you.
You guys are just making stuff up.
I don't do that, by the way. Right, so Chazal typically don't do that. I mean, most of them.
So assume I don't know anything about you. I heard they said you're a convert, and they were supposed. Yes. I guess they were saying that to delegitimize you, which is a bit strange. Because that give you more legitimacy. It means you do it out of choice, not just because you were born that way. Right. But can you give me your story and, like, as we say, stand leg?
Sure. Right. No, in terms of them caring about converts, right? The Torah talks about, vaftim et ger, ger lo tone, all that get tossed out the window when you disagree with them. So yeah, I mean, I converted to Judaism around 24 years ago.
Not to mention, isn't there a halakha that you're not allowed to remind a ger that he's a ger?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a halacha. I'm for sure it's like midat hashidut. I mean, it's just basic decency. But yeah, these guys, whatever. I mean, so I converted around 24 years ago, and I'm from South Florida originally. I used to be a Christian. I went to seminary as a Christian, and then I came to the realization that Jesus is not God or the Messiah. It took me around 3 years to convert. After I converted, I moved to Israel. I learned the Nesha Torah. I learned the Or Sameach, and I got married. Then I moved back to America, and then I officially made Aliyah. And I lived in Israel for around 5 years. I worked for Jeff Shadel. I was a Makarv in Hebrew U for a good while. And I started making videos over there. In Israel is when I started proselytizing. Every time we'd have an event in Hebrew U and Tel Aviv University, I mean, I realized that we would get more non-Jews than born Jews. And then I'm saying, why are we pushing these guys away, right? I mean, I kind of had my views, but someone told me that the Rosh Hashiva of the Derek program in Or Sameach kind of felt like I did. His name was Rabbi Moshe Lazarus. I think he's still there. So then he wrote me a letter. It's almost, I use it like a heter, saying that there's nothing wrong with encouraging non-Jews to consider becoming Jewish as long as you focus on Jews first. So I'm like, fine, there's enough people focusing on Jews first. I mean, it wouldn't hurt them if one person focuses more on Gentiles, at least on Jews and Gentiles equally. So in Israel, I started making videos encouraging people to consider becoming Jewish. It might be for you. If you're looking for some sort of religious outlet, consider becoming Jewish. And that made me hated in the Jewish world, but I thought that it was the right thing to do. I think the way you defeat bad religion is with good religion, not with no religion. And for sure, not with a primitive system like the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach or anything silly like that. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And from the beginning, I didn't embrace Kabbalah.
You use the word primitive a lot. I don't know what you mean by it.
Ethically primitive. I think a Christian is ethically superior and more sophisticated than a Noahide is. I think a Muslim, an ethical Muslim, is also ethically superior to a Noahide, just because if we're going to separate the world by deeds, then we have to compare who keeps more laws. Now, Christians...
Is it a competition who keeps more laws?
Absolutely, because the competition is who makes this world better, who leaves this world a little better than they found it.
Yes, they should be the right laws, right?
Oh, well, ethical laws. For sure, there's ceremonial laws and ethical laws. If you're going to, separate the world ethically, then that we should distinguish people by their deeds. And I think that Christians or ethical Christians and ethical Muslims do more good in this world than people who are limited to 7 laws. They may keep more than 7 laws, but that's in spite of this primitive system.
Do you mean
That
laws
yes,
from among the Torah, or do you mean Muslims have a law to like fast on Ramadan? Does that make them more ethical?
no. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have laws that are split between the ceremonial and the ethical. Like after Larecha Kamocha is clearly ethical, but in terms
Yeah,
of keeping
I
Shabbat
know.
holy, that's ceremonial.
Yeah.
So this is why I think that if more people kept Torah laws, then the world would improve.
Okay. Well, I definitely agree with more people kept more Torah laws. It would be a better world. So when you mean laws, you mean the ethical laws, what they call in the Middle Ages the mitzvot sichliot, the ones that if we sat down to figure out, or
Sure, some
what
people say
that,
mishpatim like versus hukim.
so like Rasag talks about the sichliot versus the Toriot. The Toriot are the ones you would only know from the Torah, and the sichliot are ones you could figure out yourself if you sat down to create an ideal society.
Right, like mitzvot ben adam lechavero and mitzvot ben adam lemakom. I mean, I think that's
No, but it doesn't necessarily fall into that category. In other words, there could be ones ben adam lemakom that are sichliot, that you would be able to figure out on your own, even if the Torah wasn't given. Like, I don't know, let's say don't lie.
No, I
It
hear
could
you.
be not lying to another person. You could be lying to God.
Yeah, like the
You can make
paraduma,
an oath
right?
that you don't.
Yeah.
Right. So that's definitely mitzvah torit, which is basically they're arbitrary laws that we wouldn't know if the Torah didn't give them. So. So okay, yeah. So I think I agree with you. I'm in some, for sure, in some
You
ways.
proselytize as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I mean, if a Christian came to
I
you,
don't proselytize.
okay.
If
I
a
mean, for
Christian
example,
came
if a
to me and
Christian
asked to
came to you, you're not going to offer the Noahide laws because you don't embrace it as a system. So, what would you offer them instead of your own current belief system?
So I have Christians who come to me all the time and ask to convert, and I say I don't do conversions. And they say, convince me why I shouldn't believe in Jesus. And I say, you should figure that out for yourself. I don't think I have anything original to contribute to that Jews and Christians haven't said for the last 2,000 years. What I think is true. I mean, if you look at the earliest Jewish and Christian sources, especially the earliest Christian sources on this, where they're quoting Jews, I mean, it's the same thing we would say today, more or less. So I don't try to change people's belief. I try to I call it empower people with information. I think the most dangerous thing in the world is an ignorant Muslim and an ignorant Christian and an ignorant atheist who doesn't even know what their belief system is. So now I don't have a lot of insights on Islam, so I can't really help them. But I do have some pretty insights, I think, on the Tanakh and on things that at least have a Jewish background, like the New Testament. And actually some of Islam does have a Jewish background, and I do have a little bit of insight on that. But
so
that's for a future.
I also wouldn't try to convince necessarily not to believe in Yeshua or something. I mean, I'm clearly not Messianic, but I'm very Messianic friendly, meaning my job with Christians, from my perspective, is to try to get them to be more Torah observant. But I don't think we should separate the world by who you happen to think the Messiah is or isn't. I mean, I actually believe that the notion of the Messiah is more of a developed idea. So, I mean, I'm surprised that Karaites even believe in the notion. I mean, do they believe in the notion? But do Karaites believe in the notion of the Messiah like Jews do, like Orthodox Jews do?
So I'm always careful about to say about what Karaites believe. I can tell you what I believe, and I can tell you what historically most Karaites believed, and both in both cases the answer is yes. That Mashiach is look. It's very clear in the Tanakh. There's the term Mashiach isn't used, ironically, not in that sense. But obviously we have the descendant of David who will be king and who will usher in an era of peace. And I get the question all the time from Christians, how is it you don't believe in Jesus? And to me it's or I say, I'm waiting for the Messiah to come, right? I mean, if Jesus were to fulfill all the things that are promised in Isaiah, chapter 11, for example, then it wouldn't be a matter of believing in the Mashiach. He would be the Mashiach, right? Whoever fulfills it would be Rabbi Schneerson if he fulfilled those things, right? Whoever fulfilled those things would be the Mashiach. It's interesting. No commandment in the Torah or in the Tanakh to believe in the Mashiach, right? Just like there's no commandment to believe in the king. You can not obey the king at your own peril, but that's only because he has political power to punish you if you don't believe it, if you don't obey him, right? But the idea of believing, and we do actually have a concept of believing in Moshe. It says Vayaminu b'Hashem u'Moshe avdo, right? And they believed in God and in Moses' servant, right? So there is an idea of believing in Moshe, but believing in Moshe means you believe that God spoke to him and that the commandments that he gave are actually from God and he didn't make them up. So the Mashiach won't be able to make new commandments. So it's not even, to me, it's not even a relevant concept. And I don't think that's an unusual, I think maybe outside of Chabad, most Jews would agree with that. I don't, maybe Chabad too.
Yeah, I mean, I have a different rendition of the character, with the different images of this character that appear in the prophets. I've come to the realization that the notion of the Messiah was developed by essentially, I mean, Chazal, the rabbis, whatever you want to call it, to in some way separate who they were really waiting for in the prophets, and that was that they thought God was going to come down and fight wars in their behalf, and he was going to defeat the Assyrians, he was going to get them out of Bavel. I believe that the early Israelites incorrectly believed that it was going to be God himself. It says, I mean, that this individual is going to step in the Mount of Olives, that is going to split in half water. I mean, this is clearly not a regular human being. This is the character that later became a king of Israel. I mean, just because they were trying to, in some way, just eliminate the anthropomorphic understanding, but individual having limbs and.
So I think they were right that God is going to come down and fight wars. I believe that will happen, but I'll qualify that. So at Hebrew University, there was a concept that they called dual causality. I think it was actually coined by a professor at Hebrew University. Sibatiuta kfula in Hebrew. And dual causality is this idea that we can say something like there's no other savior but God, and then we have no problem in the Tanakh saying that Shimshon is a savior. Well, wait a minute. I thought there was no other savior but God. Well, okay, so God does it through Shimshon, right? And so you could attribute the same action both to God and to one of God's agents, whether that's a judge or a prophet or a king, or somebody else, a general, whatever, or it could even be Koresh, right? Cyrus, the Gentile king. You can attribute the same action both to God and to an agent that God uses. Christians like to call that agency, but it's more of a nuanced concept than that. So when it talks about God coming down on in Zechariah and one leg is on either side of, is that God or is that the Mashiach, and is in the Mashiach a giant? I don't know. We'll find out when that happens. That's very hypothetical to me.
But that's maybe come to the conclusion that the notion of the Messiah was created by the rabbis in order to justify this individual that, at least according to the Rambam, is extremely problematic. I mean, the Rambam limits everything the Messiah is supposed to be to the image of Bar Kokhba, which, I mean, I think was a pretty foreign to every mystical understanding of the Messiah that Chazal had back then, right? I mean, even though Rabbi Akiva was a big macher and he chose Bar Kokhba.
Wait, so I'm confused. So if Rabbi Akiva's idea was Bar Kokhba and Rambam's idea was Bar Kokhba, then their ideas weren't actually that different. So what are you saying is? So I'm not following.
No, Rabbi
who
Akiva
made him into?
There's no monolithic understanding about anything regarding the Messiah in the Talmud. I mean, I'm looking at Per Chalik. I mean, everyone's just going back and forth. No, the Rambam used Bar Kokhba to in some way strip away any metaphysical concept behind Mashiach. I mean, the Rambam holds like Shmuel, the Amara in the Gemara that says that nothing is going to change during Yemos Mashiach, with the exception that Israel is going to have peace in their time and the ability to study Torah freely, or something as simple as that.
So I don't believe in a Messiah who's going to be like a god, right? He'll be a prophet, but he won't be as great a prophet as Moshe, because it says there's no prophet like Moshe, right? So I don't know that I don't think I disagree with the Rambam or Rabbi Akiva. I just don't know who it's going to be, right?
I'm not disagreeing with the Rambam, but I'm saying that the Rambam brought this rendition of the Messiah to in some way wash away all these crazy notions of the Superman individual. For example, the Zohar says that he's going to be able to read your mind. The Ramban teaches that this individual is never going to die.
Does anybody believe that? Does anybody believe that? What the Zohar says about that?
Well, nowadays they do. I mean, they
Do
think
they?
the Messiah is an Ubermensch. I mean, this is a Superman. I mean, it's not. This is why it's a double standard when they attack Christians, and you can't really blame them for making their Messiah into God. It says Rabbi Akiva. It's interesting. I mean, this is also Rabbi Akiva, that he looked up into heaven and he saw two thrones, right? Like one for God and one for Mashiach, and then he was chastised. But it shows that in terms of anything definitive regarding the Messiah, nobody knows what's going on, right? I
I think
mean,
it
it
would
was
have been more
everybody.
problematic if you only saw one throne, that the Mashiach was sitting on God's throne, right? I mean,
Right, right.
no.
Well, I mean, the whole notion of Shituf was, I mean, invented by Ashkenazi rabbis,
Hey,
anyways.
hey, Tony Probst here asked, but Moses said there would be a prophet like him in Deuteronomy. So can you answer that?
Sure, sure. So with Deuteronomy chapter 18, if you read it straight through, I mean, the beginning says that when you begin to emulate the nations you've essentially displaced, I will raise up for you a prophet. And then it says, and the prophet that doesn't speak what I command him to, right? In other words, it went from the singular to the plural, and the prophet that doesn't do it, meaning what other chapter in Torah tells us to accept the prophet when he comes? There, only Deuteronomy chapter 18. That chapter is either talking about the Messiah or the only chapter we have to accept any prophet when God raises him up, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. So that means that's a chapter that legitimizes the office of the prophet. And so it's either or. It can't be talking about one individual or prophets in general. So I would say it's prophets in general.
So I don't think it ever actually, and I could be wrong, but I don't think it ever says it in plural. Meaning when it talks about the false
No.
prophet, it's also singular.
No, the word is not in plural. The phrase is in plural. And the prophet that speaks what I did not command them. You see,
Why is
like
that?
first
Why
it
is
says,
that
I
plural?
will raise up for you a prophet. Essentially, when you begin to emulate the nations you've displaced. And the prophet that does not speak what I command him. Now, this is like
Yeah, so
prophet.
they're both categories. Neither of them is plural. It's what we call in linguistics a collective singular. It's like when God created not the heavens. When God created birds, it says Ofa Shemayim, right? Did he only create one? No, obviously he created the whole category of Of. Right? It's actually a characteristic of Semitic languages.
The idea that I will raise up for you a prophet is tied to this idea that chapter is talking about prophets in general. That yes, whenever you begin to stray, I'm going to raise up for you a prophet. That's prophetic intervention. That means exile, sin, and redemption is a formula that appears in Torah. When you begin to sin, God brings you
I
prophetic
think we're
intervention.
agreeing on the result. I think we're agreeing on the result that Deuteronomy 18 is the office of prophet, not a specific prophet.
Correct.
Is it
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Okay. We're probably not. Maybe we're categorizing the linguistic explanation of it a bit differently, but the result is the same. So then Tony Probe says, but Yahshua did not teach against Torah, but taught Torah. Okay, what does that have to do with it?
Yeah. I have no issue with the messianic believing that Jesus or Yeshua was a prophet. What would it change? I mean, he was clearly a decent individual. I can't think of anything unkosher he really said. It's not an issue. I mean, as a matter of fact, in terms of Isaiah 53, I mean, I have no issue including Yeshua in that. I mean, I consider that more like the songs of the martyrs in terms of, in context, it's talking about Isaiah himself, that whenever God sends a messenger to the children of Israel, they're going to be made to suffer because he sends messengers to them, prophets to them, when Israel is at their worst. So if you believe Jesus is a prophet, he would also be in that same mix of prophets that were rejected and mistreated, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be talking about one person. The sentiment is still the same.
Yeah. So Isaiah 53 is interesting, but let's save that for a different conversation.
Sure.
My view is that it hasn't been fulfilled yet, because in verse 12 it talks about this victory of dividing the spoils, but but who knows? It's
Yeah, no,
there's a
Isaiah's
lot.
problematic in general. I mean, I'm convinced that there's two Isaiahs who wrote the book of Isaiah because, I mean, it's actually with
Okay.
Ibn Ezra, I mean, it has a similar sentiment.
Yeah, Ibn Ezra talks about Deuter Isaiah. I know. Yeah. So, but what does that have to do with it?
No, that,
Meaning, let's say there's a second Isaiah that wrote chapters 40 through 66. I don't believe that, but some, obviously Ibn Ezra did. So it's still talking about some figure. I mean, what would that matter? How would that affect our interpretation Isaiah
In terms of
53.
Isaiah 53, I don't think it's talking about one figure in general. I mean, if there's any one figure, then it's Isaiah in general, but it's giving us a message of what occurs when God sends messengers to Israel, that this is what
Okay.
occurs. I mean, Jewish tradition teaches us that Isaiah was murdered. That he was hiding in a tree, and then he chopped down the tree. Um, yeah, no, the reason
Okay.
I said that is it's hard to say anything definitive from the book of Isaiah. Although, I mean, I think I could honestly say that it's not Tovia Single's rendition of it, that the suffering servant is Israel, especially like if you believe it's one Isaiah, because this occurred before any major exile, right? I mean, the whole story of Isaiah was with the Assyrians.
I mean, the 10 tribes have been exiled at that point.
Yeah, what they were surrounded by the king of the north and Sancherib. So they were still in alliance.
So it's a pretty optimistic narrative to say that nothing bad happened when and definitely the Tanakh presents it that way. But if you read closely, what happened even in the Tanakh is all of Israel except for Jerusalem was conquered, and we have archaeological evidence that confirms that. Right, Lachish was conquered, the second biggest city, and people were taken in exile. You can actually see,
Yep, at the time of Isaiah or afterwards?
That's in the time of Isaiah. So the Assyrians invaded and they surrounded Jerusalem, and they wanted to surrender. This story appears in both Melachim and Yeshayahu.
Mm-hmm.
And Yeshayahu told them, "Don't surrender," and they didn't surrender. And then a rumor came that I forget who it was, Tirhaka, the king of Cush or something, was invading, and so the Assyrians fled. And then there was also a plague. It's a bit confused. But
there was an alliance with the king of Assyria, or i.e. the general. There's a confusion where he was both, and the king of the north.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a different event. Isaiah was active for several decades. So
No, I'm not talking about the book of Isaiah. In terms of how it appears in Chronicles, when they wake up in the morning and God miraculously killed thousands of Assyrians, there was an alliance with the king of the north that they were both attacking Jerusalem because it was. I mean, that's how I read it.
Okay, but my point is that before they attacked Jerusalem, they attacked every other city in Judah, and they actually conquered cities. And so quite a lot of people went into exile, even though Jerusalem didn't go into exile and the Beit HaMikdash wasn't destroyed. There were people going into exile. I don't know.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like the whole history of the Samaritans, at least the rendition that appears in Tanakh. I mean, that's where it came from, because they had a tactic of displacing people. So they displaced people from the Shomron and put in Putim, essentially. But when I was in Israel, I don't know if you saw my videos, but I went to Holon and I was interviewing, Samaritans and getting their rendition of...
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Hey, I've got a podcast, and I think you'd be an interesting person to bring on my podcast if you're interested.
Yeah, man, let's do it. Whenever you want.
Let's be in touch.
Yeah, bro. Thanks for coming on.
All right. I got to run. Thanks. Shalom.
Okay, man. Take it easy.